Hello, Kikuo.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Okay. Um, Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the session entitled Telling Stories Through Illustration, a conversation with R. Kikuo Johnson. We're very happy you could be with us today as part of the 1455 Summer Festival, hosted by 1455 Literary Arts. I'm Chad Lewis, Assistant Illustration Professor in Visual Communication Design Department at Kent State University. I'm so excited to interview R. Kikuo Johnson today. He's a cartoonist and illustrator born in Maui in 1981. His award-winning drawings and stories regularly appear in books, advertisements, periodicals, animation, and on the cover of New Yorker. Johnson divides his time drawing in Brooklyn, teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design, and playing the ukulele with his family in Hawaii. His most recent book is the graphic novella, No One Else. For this interview, I'll be asking Kikuo about his creative process as he builds his illustrations. Okay. And so I have a few questions here. Yeah, I have a few questions here. You'll see.
Can I just say real quick?
Yeah.
I'll just, sorry to butt in. I just want to say I'm so grateful to be here and so feel so lucky to have you, Chad, as our guiding force here, who's just an amazing fellow illustrator and master of line and storyteller. So Phil, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. Before I got the chance to chat with you, I've had your work on my desktop as stuff that I've loved. So it's wonderful to get to talk with you. So everyone will be seeing me. I have a few questions here that Kikuo and I have chatted about ahead of time. So you'll see me look down at the screen and talk, and then we're going to open up for conversation between us. Okay. So first question: you've worked for the New Yorker, CNN, Airbnb, and Marvel, to name a few. What is important to you when you're trying to work with a new client's needs while maintaining your style?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think about style too much. I mostly get the ask whatever the question is and just really try to solve the problem. Usually if someone's coming to me, they want me to tell a story in some way. And I just start with the story, try to figure out a composition that is going to tell the story in the most direct and clear way, and worry about any kind of surface decoration or the color and all that stuff I save for later. It's really just like, what are the pieces of the puzzle that will tell the story? And that's kind of my guiding principle, no matter who the client is.
Yeah, that's really the only way to do it, because the word style is almost a dirty word when you're trying to problem solve.
Totally. And I know I have a style, but I actually like, and people tell me they can see it, but I'm trying to avoid that in a way. I'm trying to be as invisible and direct as possible, and style just kind of comes out of a deadline, really, just try to get it done.
Great. It's fantastic to see your work on the cover of New Yorker in such an iconic space. How did you come to first produce covers for this publication?
Yeah, back in 2012, I already had one graphic novel under my belt, and I got an email from Toon Books, which is a publisher of all ages comics, designed to be great comics, but also to like teach reading through through comics. It's a great way to learn to read, obviously, pictures and words, books that kids can read to themselves as opposed to books that parents read to kids. And the publisher of that is Francoise Mouly, who is just a pioneer in the comics world. She pioneered a lot of the avant-garde and art comics in the 80s. She was the publisher of Mouse in 1986, or previous to 1986, and she is now the cover editor of the New Yorker. So when she reached out to me, I said yes to the book, and working with her was amazing. I learned so much. It was like going to grad school, and hoping with my fingers crossed that maybe also somewhere down the line that other connection to the New Yorker would help out. Even though I had already been an illustrator for the New Yorker since 2006, doing the inside drawings and stuff, this was an opportunity to have a connection to the cover editor. And I submitted ideas for 4 years, and nothing quite stuck until finally in 2016, it was like the music issue, and Francoise calls me and she's like, "We need someone new, we need someone young, we need someone in Brooklyn, like we're gonna send you to the club." And like I went with a music reviewer, shout out to Matt, and we had a great night, and I drew kind of the hip young Brooklyn cover. That was the first one, and then since then it was, once you get one, the editor and the editorial staff there can better visualize what a sketch will look like when it's finished. And I began to be able to pitch my own ideas and tell my own story occasionally. And it's been wonderful.
Yeah, knowing the comic world and hearing like Mouse as the publisher of Mouse, it's just that's an iconic thing. That's amazing. And so to move in that direction and work with her is just, it has to be really special.
Absolutely, and she's just so smart. Every time we work together, we were just working together last week on something. Stay tuned for the next issue of the New Yorker.
Oh man.
And not a cover, something else. But everything she touches, she just knows exactly how to make it so much better and still like amplifying the artist's voice, not like stepping in front of it or anything.
Speaking of New Yorker covers, you're on a bit of a roll. You've done a bunch of really beautiful ones recently. And our next question is your recent editorial for the New Yorker entitled Delayed. You showed a sense of anxiety between an Asian American mother and her child waiting for the subway. It fit the events in the news for the month, and it definitely hit a clear emotion. What was your thought process in trying to portray such an overwhelming emotion in such a subtle way?
That was a really tough call. I got a call on a Sunday. I was out to lunch with some friends, and Francoise was like, do you have any ideas for a cover to address the violence against Asian Americans specifically in New York, but also that was shortly after the shooting in Georgia at the massage parlors. And I said yes. I said I felt a little nervous about it, but I said yes. And the minute I hung up the phone, I was like, just a sinking sense of doubt and like and fear and like imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know. It's a lot. Basically, I was imagining like, what's Twitter going to say? Like, who's going to attack me? Like, right. Is there anything right to say here? And in the end, I kind of just drew every idea I had, and they ranged from like very angry ones to like very kind of elegiac covers, and to the New Yorker's credit and to David Remnick's credit, the editor-in-chief there, he wanted to go with one that was kind of just a direct portrayal of a sense of what people were feeling in New York. And as I drew it, my mom was planning a visit and to New York, and I just imagined it's like I reread a lot of those news articles. It was rough, and I just imagined my mom in that position, and I channeled that and came up with something that seems to have come through. So I was super grateful that people really responded to it, and I got some very, very generous letters following that one.
Yeah, and if I can pay you a compliment here, when we talked about style earlier on, and there is, so many times people worry about style that it gets in the way of the storytelling and the, worrying too much about aesthetics, whereas this piece in particular, I apologize, my screen share doesn't seem to be working, but in particular, the nuance that you captured in the way your characters are standing, how they're positioned on the screen captures that moment and that kind of claustrophobia that was felt at the time beautifully. So it must not have been easy to create, but you did a wonderful job of kind of capturing that moment in time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the gesture was what I definitely spent the most time on it, and just I didn't want to present people as fearful, but at the same time I wanted to present them as anxious, and like the space between those two gestures is very narrow, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that line of action of between those emotions is minimal and also huge, basically.
Right.
And in a different direction, your most recent cover, Shared Celebration, shows an emotional change from your prior covers for the New Yorker. How do you aim to design an environment that feels lighter or even joyous?
Yeah, that was actually for that one, we, again, 4th of July, I was born in Hawaii, as I mentioned, and I have friends in Hawaii that don't celebrate the 4th of July. I also have friends in New York that don't celebrate the 4th of July. And we took an approach to that. Like, again, I submitted like a number of different sketches with a number of different tones, but I definitely wanted to have one idea that was focused on this narrative we kept hearing about, you know, a return to normal, hopefully by the 4th of July. We've been hearing that for months. And so the New Yorker covers, it tries to be as timely as possible and thinking about what is the statement for 4th of July 2021. And I just felt like it had to be coming together. It had to be a sense of community. So that was one of the sketches I submitted, and that's the one that ended up on the cover. And in terms of just that celebration, again, I think the sense of joy on that one is in the faces and in the gestures. And of course, a sky exploding with fireworks helps.
Yeah, yeah. Just the topic is more joyous, right? And I've talked about this a little bit, but your color palettes are really wonderful across all of your work. And I know that this is all kind of in the process of the most effective problem solving, but I'd love to hear how you build your colors.
Yeah, most of my work appears in print still. And occasionally when I do work outside of print, my color will shift, but I'm really thinking about my 4 inks that I have at my disposal when you work in print, which is C, Y, M, and K, and whatever combination of those 4 colors. It's actually a very limited palette for non-designers, or even for that might, or people that just haven't thought about it. There's a lot of colors that are unavailable to you in most printed media when they're printed with those 4 colors. And so what happens often is, a lot of times, just as a simple example, a lot of my covers tend to be somewhere between like a lot of blues and reds, or a lot of blues and oranges. And a lot of that just has to be with, like, the figures tend to be warm, and to make them have a graphic impact, they end up on a blue background. So a lot of it just has to do with that very simple, as you said, kind of conveying of information in the most direct and kind of punchy way, while still conveying some emotion in there with the warm and the cool.
Yeah, with the simple and also infinitely complex idea that warm colors pop forward and cool colors recede, and finding that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
speaking of color, you're also a cartoonist with No One Else set to come out this fall. The color in this, I was lucky enough to see it ahead of time, and was blown away by the color within it. But tell me a bit about your creation process for this comic, because I know a bit about it, and I know enough to know that it's a massive undertaking. Tell me a bit.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, No One Else. It's my new graphic novella coming out in November. It's 104 pages long, so it's not a super long project, and it's printed in 2 inks. It's printed in a Pantone blue and a Pantone orange. So both of those, as we're talking about CYMK, both of those are inks that the printer will use that are not inks that are typically in your books or magazines. And again, it all kind of started from a design process. As I was thinking about this book, part of the book takes place in my hometown in Maui, and up until 2016, the entire island was covered in sugarcane fields. And for 180 years, Hawaii, that was the main cash crop in Hawaii. And the way they harvest sugarcane is they light the entire field on fire to get rid of the extra leaves and stuff, just to get the cane itself. And I just, growing up there, I just took it for granted that there are these massive mushroom clouds on any given morning, and a raining ash on us on the playground. And it wasn't until right before the kind of final harvest on Maui in 2016 that I was watching the field burn and just being like, this is crazy. And also, this is not going to be around forever. And I started thinking about it a lot, and just so inspired, just visually, and just like something as an experience, and the emotion of that. I wanted to try to capture in the graphic novel I was working on, and I set the whole book there around these cane fields. And I wanted the scenes where the fields were burning to have just like one more kind of emotional trigger. And I found that when I added that orange ink, and not only any orange, but that like bright Pantone orange in print that is disarmingly vibrant. It just added an emotional impact that is exactly what I was looking for. And it became not only representative of the fire, but a symbol with a kind of greater subtext in the book.
Yeah, and as subtext is a wonderful way to put it. I found it so visually arresting, and also your color choice. Not to dwell on colors here, but I'm a huge fan as leading your eye through this narrative in just a really beautiful way, similar to your covers. So in this massive undertaking that is creating a book, tell me a bit about your process. Tell me a bit about for those that don't know how a comic is made from a creator-owned perspective.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how I don't know how to do it other than this one way, which is to do it. And then after it's done, take it around and be like, hey, you want to publish this? Hey, you want to publish this? So that was my approach with my first book. And that was my approach with this book, where timing was good because my partner 2 years ago decided that she was going to pursue grad school. And I was like, well, if you're going to live like a poor college student, so am I. I stopped taking work. I had saved up some money. And I was just like, I'm going to live lean and pursue my dream. And I spent 2 years kind of drafting and redrawing and rethinking and kind of controlling this enormous puzzle to make every panel fit and tell the story that I wanted. And the two of the most creatively gratifying years of my life. And I just feel so lucky to do it. And yeah, and then I want the finished book. Part of the inspiration too was that my publisher of my first graphic novel in 2005, Fantagraphics, had been asking me to publish a hardcover of that graphic novel, and I didn't want to promote. I didn't want to promote an old book, and so I was like, well, maybe if I have a new book, and then we'll reissue the old book and gussy that up a little bit. I made some edits on the old one. So 2 books in print in the fall, and I'm very excited to kind of re-enter the comic book space. There really, for me, is nothing that comes even close to the creative fulfillment of like drawing a story. It feels great.
Yeah, and was was Night Fisher the other one?
That's right. Yeah, Night Fisher, my first book from 2005.
That's
Yeah.
That's the one I had. So. Yeah, and beautifully done for that one as well. I'm excited to check out the hardcover. So you are, New Yorker cover with these kind of iconic images that are produced. That iconic image has to say a lot, right? There is so much thinking that goes into capturing a moment that speaks for lots of moments and lots of people. A comic, however, is leading the eye from the top left to the bottom right of each page and telling a story in increments. And those are drastically different ways of creating. Tell me a bit about, what you found as you're moving from one medium to the other.
Yeah. Kind of as with illustration, kind of, I think Art Spiegelman, we brought him up before, the author of Mouse. I don't know if he coined it, but he often says that like one of the things that attracts him to comics is that making art otherwise would be like playing tennis without a net. And that's kind of my approach in both illustration and comics, where everything just comes back to telling that core story. And my first comic, Night Fisher, I drew before I had really done any professional illustration. I started in college. And I noticed that doing the new book after, a 15-year career of doing kind of trying to cram a single story into one image just made me so much more concise. Like I was able to in a single image, just cram in a lot more information without it feeling cluttered or confusing. Thanks to that long practice. In a single image, it can be, yeah, juggling all those parts. I think I'll leave it there. I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, well, you answered it beautifully. There's the process. You're your own editor with a comic page, and so there is this freedom and also this weight too. Is this story being told the most effectively? Which is daunting. It's daunting because there's an infinite amount of ways that the story could be told, and when looking at your book, I was realizing there is some really beautiful kind of aerial viewpoints that you took to establish a scene, and I'm curious about that process as far as you're building those pages. Um, you know, how are you developing working with scenes with these camera views? I'd love to hear some of that process.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, in the new book, no one else, because it is a story about a family. It's about a family going through grieving. I actually wrote it as a dark comedy and just played it straighter and straighter and straighter. I'm not sure if it's a comedy anymore, but it's got comedic elements, and but it is a story of like um, a lot of subtext in it, and the conflict in it is mostly interior. It's this family's emotions as they deal with each other, and because that story was mostly interior, I found that like telling the story as directly as possible without a whole lot of fancy like storytelling tricks. In comics, of course, it's a page and you can do anything on that page. You can line up those panels in any form and you can put whatever you want in those panels. And in previous books, like Night Fisher and my kid's book, The Shark King, there's a really kind of variety of page layouts and dynamic design with lots of diagonal panels and all kinds of crazy stuff. Because telling an exterior story, telling that action, you want the story to really move and have that excitement on the page and be dynamic. With no one else, because the story is interior, I found that like trying to be as direct as possible with the simplest pages allowed for the reader to form their own opinion about the content instead of bashing the head with like, you're supposed, this is exciting, right? Like read it this way. I wanted to try to step back and tell it, show the information and let the reader kind of gather what they would from it. And sometimes in order to get everything in the panel, to answer your question about aerial shots, sometimes in order to get like, to be able to see everything, I needed that kind of bird's eye view, that God's eye view, that, omniscient narration is the way I thought about it, to show you everything in a scene, or everything in the parking lot, or everything in the field. Make sure like you can see the whole thing. One of the hardest things in illustration is to show something missing. How do you show something that's not there? And a lot of, right, it's one of the hardest things. And there's a lot of things missing in this comic book. So a lot of times what I'd have to do is show the whole scene from the sky and then show it again with that thing missing. Or show it in a different, show it twice and show it either missing or a new thing there. And that was kind of just the most direct solution I came up with to
Yeah,
solve that problem.
and that kind of clear line drawing really, if you're going for nuance and you're going for something that's missing from one panel to the next, having a clear visual guide is integral to telling that story well. And I read it as a dark comedy.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah,
Thank you. That's the goal.
yeah. The Cheeto scene, amazing, wonderfully done. The cheese balls.
Thank you.
So, if you have one piece of
Wonderful.
advice for someone who wants to illustrate across genres, what would it be?
Back to what we opened with is try to focus on the story as much as possible. If this is a question addressed to people starting out and entering the field, of course you're going to be focused on the way things look. Of course you're going to be focused on, I'm talking to students now, of course you're going to be building up your skills to you're just trying to make a face look real, let alone like all these other things. Or you're trying to like get like the character to look the way you want, or you're just trying to make a sense of depth, all the kind of fundamental illustration skills that any illustrator needs to convey information. What I would say to them is those are all really, really important, but focusing on the content first, there's never too early of a time to start. I'll give you an example. Like just the way that I designed my characters in this book is I just kind of drew stick figures in the story positions where everything was. I didn't start with any character designs. And then like, as I went through, they just kind of, and they started talking and stuff, like their design just appeared to me.
Oh,
And
that's
so kind
wonderful.
of, yeah, kind of starting, I just, and everybody has a different approach. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But I do think like starting with composition, starting with like where everything is, and then trying to develop it backwards is never a bad approach. And the sooner you start kind of attempting to communicate with your images, the better. And I think also the better all that other stuff will work out. You'll like, art directors love hiring comic book artists because comic book artists have to draw everything. We have to draw like a person picking up a phone from the back. Like, when is an illustrator going to draw that? Well, probably sometimes, but you will like again, talking to students, like you will learn. I actually felt like I didn't learn composition until I sat down and started drawing comics. And it's like, oh, this is what composition is. And I think the sooner you do it, the better off you will be.
Yeah, comics is really interesting because, you know, if you have 5 or 6 panels per page, each panel is a composition in itself. It doesn't just need to be visually entertaining, it needs to move the eye left to right. And before you worry about the, you know, beautiful nose that you're rendering, that nose has to be in the right position, you know. And then
Absolutely, there's so many moving parts, and if you nothing's worse than trying the perfect nose and then realizing, oh, this is the wrong composition to show. I've got buckets of panels I threw away that didn't make it into no one else. That's just part of the process.
That's amazing. Yeah, the best part of, for me as a creator, is seeing other creators, the work that was discarded, because you're you're an as a creator, you're an editor, you're the casting director, you're the FX person, you know, and so keeping all those things in line is just, it's not an easy thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's really exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, designer also, man. I like in my career, I've only grown a deeper appreciation for good graphic designers. I used to think that was something that like I could figure out, but man, I just when you see a well-designed, a good graphic design in any case, and in comics and or illustration, it's just, I have such an appreciation for that.
Well, and we have time for one more question. And so this one will go back to just lightly touch on the greatest challenge for you in creating these illustrations and work. As you're working, what are you actively problem solving aside from the story?
I'll answer that with a pretty mundane response, which is color. Like I find that color increasingly, color is the one thing that I haven't gotten faster at. I don't know why that is, but it tends to take me, I have to try everything before the solution becomes apparent to me. And even though there's a lot of kind of basic guiding principles I try to follow, I think about like, well, build a palette off of like 2 complements or all these kind of, you know, simple design rules, and still making the color really sing and feel harmonious and feel the right is consistently something that I love to think about, and airy, getting a sense of kind of airiness. I love landscape painting. I love that sense of space, and trying to capture that in a, couple that with my very flat approach to composition, where I'm just kind of combining flat shapes, is kind of the challenge I face off. And that's a good question.
It's interesting because the word area definitely would describe your work as, and I think you have a really beautiful balance between line and color, so it doesn't feel like you're weighing the viewer down, which is easier said than done, for sure. But it's been wonderful to talk to you. I know you have your time is precious here. I don't want to keep you for too long, but thank you so much, Kikuo. It's a treat to chat with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure and an honor to be part of 1455 and this whole thing, and even more so to have a fellow illustrator who I admire to do this with. So thank you so much, Chad.
Thank you, sir. And one more, no one else is set to come out this fall. Everyone, I've checked it out ahead of time. It's amazing. It's my favorite book right now. And I can't recommend it enough. So please, if you're looking to read a really beautiful graphic novel, please check it out. Thank you, everyone.